Being Tuesday, April 19th, we're going to begin the meeting on the Committee on Ways and Means. Please note that all our votes tonight will be by roll call. If you'd like to speak, please use the raise your hand feature that's on the bottom of your screens. Otherwise, any questions you have, please email to the town council at braintreema.gov. So that taking care of some housekeeping, I'm going to ask Clerk Semino if you could please take a roll call.
Councilor Reynolds,
Here.
Councilor Flaherty,
Here.
Councilor Mackin is absent this evening. Councilor Maglia.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, so we don't have any approval of minutes, nor do we have any old business this evening. So we'll move to the new business being we have a number of agenda items here. And first on the agenda, and I'm going to ask if we could, let's see, I know that we have in DPW and schools with us this evening. The school MSBA statement of interest is something that we will cover this evening, as well as the request for appropriation for CPA for Watson Park. And to start things off, I was wondering, do we have Town Auditor Sean McGoldrick with us?
Yes.
I am here, Joe.
Thank you. All right, thank you. So first item of business is going to be 00722, Councilor Reynolds, Q2 budget updates or take up any action relative thereto. So thank you to the Mayor's administration for getting us this information. It took a bit of time, and I guess I'm just going to say straight out that I'm a little disappointed in the time it took to get this information to us. We're talking about quarter ending 12/31/21. I felt it was necessary for this committee to provide information of any kind of insight that we could gain to understand the context of what shape the town is in from a spending priority, from a cost perspective, as we prepare for, which is only less than 2 weeks away, FY23 budget overview. So I'm not going to belabor this point. I just wanted to make it on the record that we need to share this information in a better manner than has been the case. We do have numerous questions regarding the capital plan project, and that'll be followed obviously by many more questions concerning the overall operating budget proposal that we expect to receive no later than 1 May 22. So before I ask Sean to go into this overview, I'd like to give the Mayor's office any kind of an opportunity you'd like to respond to this request in general. Any other additional commentary?
Certainly. Thank you, Chairman Reynolds. Good evening, members of the committee. Joining me, at least for this item in particular, is the Director of Finance, Ed Spellman. I appreciate the amount of time that it took to pull the information together, and by way of background and not as an excuse, I would just note that the finance department has been knee deep, to say the least, working through several munis conversion related items, as well as closing out the prior year's fiscal year, last fiscal year, which certainly contributed somewhat to the time it took to get the information together. I would note as a positive for the time that it took was we were able to include in the materials provided information with regards to the third quarter and specifically some of our big revenue components that were received through that time. So I would just like to take a minute to highlight that information for anybody that is watching at home and may not have received the materials that were provided, because everybody should have received the 6-month revenue forecast that details out all of our revenue sources, as well as the budgeted amount in actual revenue collected. But beyond that, like I said, we do have some third quarter numbers that I believe paint a picture of improvement and continued growth which is certainly something we are all striving for as we prepare for fiscal year 23. So as folks saw in the first quarter, the same trend continued in second and third for hotel and meals tax. So through the third quarter for meals tax, the town has received over $966,000 in revenue, which means we have surpassed the full year estimated revenue in this category for a total of 103.24% collected as of through the end of February, beginning of March. Same thing for hotel tax. The estimated annual revenue included in the budget for this year was $632,500. And again, the trend continued. So as of the end of the third quarter, we've received $693,127 in revenue. In this case, almost 159% of the total budgeted revenue for fiscal year 22. So this is all great news because any of the excess that's received will help to balance out at year end if there are shortfalls in the budget, and anything that's not used to cover will certainly roll right into free cash and help us in our future financial position. The other revenue source that has seen a pretty significant jump from prior years is licenses and permits, all collected through the building department. Three main categories of permit fees are weights and measures, the building permits, and the health department inspections and permits that go along with those. Since the information was provided, which included totals through January 31st, I was able to get totals through March 31st, which added an additional almost $208,000 to the total revenue received, bringing the total for licenses and permits to $1,364,995.50. So we are very close to achieving the total budgeted revenue amount, which was $1,669,667. So another kind of positive forecast on revenue for fiscal year 22. Some areas where you might have noticed a deficit are in the school revenue, and that is school bus fees. Contrast 22 with 21, where we didn't collect any revenue in this category. To date, we've collected just over $99,000, and that comes in through both online payments and bank deposits for a total of just over 75% of the total budget forecast for this year in that category. The other note I would make is on investment income. The report reflects zero, and that's because that revenue has not been reported yet. So we do anticipate revenue coming in that category. We just don't have the detail or the data to support it yet. I also thought this was a good opportunity just to highlight a couple of additional revenue sources that are not reflected in the revenue forecast report that you received. The first is rental of town properties. Everybody probably saw in the ledger, we had a couple movie and TV productions in town. That comes with revenue that we can certainly add to support the budget, and we collected just under $91,000 or $90,587 in use of our properties. That included Foster School, the parking lot at Allen Street, and also some other parking lots throughout town that were utilized by these companies. And again, that revenue all will go right back into the general fund. We also continue to receive revenue from the sale of Allen Street. We had a purchase and sale that we signed last February. To date, we've collected $250,000 in payments according to the payment schedule, and we're anticipating another $150,000 in the next month, and that's related to the special permit modification that was just approved by the planning board last week. The remaining balance is going to be paid in fiscal 23, so that's additional revenue that's going to come in for the total purchase price of $1.5 million, all of which will be collected by October 15th, 2022. That money goes into a sale of land account. And for those that were with us last year, probably recall a request to transfer those funds out of the sale of land account into the general fund. And we will be looking at a similar transfer before the end of this fiscal year. I also would note we do have some upcoming property sales in the works. The mayor has talked about Foster School. We are in the process of finalizing a request for proposals for the sale of that property and continuing to assess our buildings to make sure that we are utilizing them in the most efficient and effective manner. So again, that's just an overview that's more updated than the report. That was a 6-month report that was provided. But as information continues to come in and revenue hopefully continues to increase over those budgeted amounts, the finance department and I will certainly continue to provide updates as information becomes available. And with your permission, Chairman Reynolds, I don't know, Director Spellman, if there was anything that you wanted to add to that.
I don't have anything to add. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them now. Through the
Okay,
chair.
thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you, Chief of Staff, and thank you, Director Spellman. So I'm going to ask the members of the committee for their initial questions to some of these updates and anything else they may have brought to the table prior to this meeting. So do I have a hand up? I do. I see Council Flaherty.
Thank you. I'm just sticking to the revenue questions for now. I understand that one of the delays, the reason for the delay in the Q2 and Q3 reports had to do with the munis conversion items and the difficulty that we had in getting that finished. And I guess what I need to know is the extent to which those same delays have hampered our ability to construct a budget according to the timeline that the town needs it to be done.
No, Councilor Flaherty, we anticipate meeting the May 1st deadline with the fiscal 23 budget materials.
So, I mean, in an ordinary year, you would have had access to all of the revenue information at a much earlier date. And so just to confirm, it's not going to matter to our budget for this year that the office hasn't had access to up-to-date information on our revenue?
We have been targeting the May 1st debt submission deadline for the budget. Director Spellman and his team, as well as the department heads, have been working to put their numbers together, understanding that is the charter deadline. That is the deadline we have to abide by, and that is the deadline that we intend to meet.
Okay. Well, I'm happy to hear that. That's good news. Thank you.
Anything further, Council Flaherty?
Not at this time.
Thank you. Council Maglio, any questions or comments at this time?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple of comments, couple of questions myself. So as far as, it is concerning to me that it has taken this amount of time for us to get information, and I understand the reason you have cited, that you have a resource issue. However, I would think that because of the times that we're in, how difficult the financial situation this town finds ourselves in, there are many issues and problems that we need to face, but I think the most important issue always seems to be funding. I would think that from a standard, and I'm not certainly questioning your management, the mayor's office management of this process, but it is very disappointing from my perspective to have to ask for information and not receiving any kind of an explanation of what the nature of the delay is. So you can understand from my position, I certainly want to do the best job that the council can do to assist and work with the mayor's office to create a viable capital plan, to create a very viable and sustainable and stable operating budget that will follow. And to this point, I would say at a minimum, I am disappointed that this information comes in a bulk at very late in the process. So I just want to make sure that my feelings are understood and how this process should be working. Number two, I don't know if I'm ready to accept the fact that you had a problem getting information input into Munis, or my understanding of how this process worked, and that here we are, let's see, 3 years into the process of the Munis transition. That to me is more of a, I guess, management issue about why that hadn't been handled. And that we, as in result, would have to scramble for information or our ability to be able to read and understand and process this information so that we can have a very fruitful process and address the capital needs of the community and to address the operating budget. So I just want to make sure I had that on the table, that people understood the importance and the seriousness of what this committee is trying to get done, and the purposefulness and the proactiveness that we are trying to get done in order that we can work and that we will not be the delay in any kind of a process to deliver for our residents and taxpayers. That being said, I have a couple of questions.
Mr. Chairman, if
Yes.
I could just respond to that before you move into your questions.
Certainly, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. So respectfully, Munis was a concept that was initiated 3 years ago, but it was a transition that started in substance in the last 2 years. And so it's very different to begin to engage in a software transition and then go into it and then lose the ability to train in person because of COVID, which created delays. And I don't provide this as an excuse, but I do think it's important, and I appreciate the committee's attentiveness to the process and the committee's frustration, I'll say, is what I'm feeling in the delay. But I do think that it's important that we take it into context and we have an honest dialogue about what was happening on our end during the time period. So departments were training on a whole new software via Zoom, and that included a large portion of our finance department and those departments that would be specifically responsible for the collection and entry of this data. And when I say that, I'm talking about accounting and I'm talking about the treasurer collector's office, which I'm sure everybody here can appreciate. And then when we actually transitioned the software, as with any software, there are going to be bumps in the road that are going to cause delay, and that they're going to take up an incredible amount of time for the individuals that are most affected, which unfortunately, due to the nature of Munis, again, is our finance department. So what we had was a department that was tasked with closing out a fiscal year, while at the same time reconciling receipts and transitioning to new software that included payroll and payment of certain bills. And so all of that was happening at the same time that we were receiving requests for information. And I'm sure Director Spellman can attest to the strain that this put on his departments, and in some cases, the limited staffing that was available during the time to gather and input the information. So again, I appreciate the frustration, but I do not want there to be any misunderstanding about the fact that on this side of the table, the town was continuing to review the finances. It was continuing to review the revenue numbers and receipts that were available to it so that we could continue to plan, not just for the balance of fiscal year 22, but also looking into fiscal year 23 and beyond. So we will continue to make every effort to ensure that this committee has all of the information that it needs. And in return, I would ask that if this committee has questions about the information being provided or the requests that come before it, that we engage in the dialogue outside of these meetings so that the department representatives that come before you to provide explanation and provide support for the requests they have put before this committee for approval, we can address those and come to these meetings even more prepared than I know the team is here this evening to address that, and do so in writing so that we can make the most effective and efficient use of the time. I understand what you're saying. I hear you. We continue to strive to make this process more informed, more transparent, and more efficient. And we look forward to continuing to work with you, Chairman Reynolds, and the members of this committee as we prepare for the budget hearing next month in order to do that.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. Obviously, we too feel a very strong ability of this community, committee, pardon me, to get to the bottom of these answers. I'm not willing to accept everything that you've told me as a reason, and because I'm very familiar, and I'm not going to use this as a platform for us to go back and forth on this type of stuff. But what you had to say, I just need to qualify my perspective as well. Okay, I was a professional project manager and implementation manager in a major Fortune 500 company. I had to do implementation of major systems globally through the kind of ability and the kind of assets that are available for this particular project in this community. So I guess what I'm saying, without getting into details and telling you how this process could work better, I'm asking you that I'm going to take you on your word on this, that you are going to do better, and that the communication of any delays that hamper our ability, because when I don't get information, I just assume something's not right. So that's all I'm asking. It's going to be my last word on it. Better communications. So with that being said, I have some questions. So we have, and it's very good news, I have to hand it to the town, very good news that we're seeing these numbers that are coming in much higher than anticipated from our hotels and meals tax. That's terrific. We certainly need that. Through the schools, on the school bus revenue, it has gone up. And has it been able to keep up? The question is, has those costs, those revenues been able to keep up with the costs to date? And is there any feeling for that will balance out or not as we get to the end of the fiscal year?
Well, not to put them on the spot, because I know this isn't the item that they are here for this evening, but we do have Superintendent Jim Lee and Business Manager Ed Cronin with us. My understanding is that we have to date collected, as I said, about 75% of the budgeted revenue for fiscal 22 from the school bus fees, which is up 100% from fiscal 21 because we didn't collect any last year. But I also, and I could be wrong, but my understanding is that we're not going to collect any additional fees, but I would ask the superintendent or Mr. Cronin to we also have, my apologies, Lisa Fisk-Keeger, chairwoman of the school committee, with us this evening, since we're talking about schools, but I would ask either Superintendent Lee or Mr. Cronin to verify that for us.
I would, thank you, Ms. Taub. At this point, I would concur that we would not anticipate the town collecting any more revenue from transportation. Obviously, we're deep into the school year. Incremental increases to ridership would be just that, one or two kids here or there who might move into town. So I do believe that the revenue that we've realized at this point is the revenue we're going to take in.
Will that cover your costs for the remainder of the operating year?
That particular revenue goes straight to the town. We have covered our transportation costs here at the school system.
Thank you. Terrific. All right. Moving on, very glad to hear that Braintree is being recognized for a lot of nice things that can offer to our fellow citizens around the state and around the country and the world, for that matter, when we start talking about movie production, TV production. I'm happy to hear that, and I commend the mayor's office for being able to offer up those types of resources in order to gain some unexpected and additional revenues. The 44 Allen Street, is that sale closed yet?
So we have an executed purchase of sale with 2 addendums attached to it. The closing date is scheduled for October of 22, and the payment schedule was set up as such so that the developer could apply for certain state grants associated with the affordability rate for the project. But what I can say is, as part of the extended schedule, the town negotiated that all payments made shall be non-refundable. So if at any point during the process the buyer, in this case Arch Communities and Wind Development, attempts to back out of the deal, any funds received by the town up until that point will remain with the town. There's no obligation to return payments. That said, I don't anticipate that being an issue. As I mentioned, a special permit was issued for this project. I want to say it was January of this year. After that, there were some modifications that the developer sought to make to help with the affordability component and the state funding. So they went back to the planning board for a minor modification, which was approved last Tuesday. That is one of the last permits associated with this project, and it is the last permit on the town side for the project. And so what that does is it triggers another payment in accordance with the schedule, which I believe is a total of $150,000.
Thank you. That's a good additional information. Appreciate that. So, all right, I'm going to move over now to the town auditor, Sean McGoldrick. And Sean, if you could give us your overview of the Q2 budget update.
Sure. Joe, were you looking for the long-term projection update, or I know you just said Q2, but I don't.
Just any other additional commentary you may have on the Q2 update and any perspectives you may have from an accounting principle, good practices that could be shared with this audience, and in particular the Ways and Means Committee.
No major update on when I last saw the numbers. As Nicole said, most revenues are looking good. I also have seen for other communities too, their meals, rooms, and motel hotel tax gone up as probably higher than most expected based on the 22 budget for all communities. And we'll see too when we get the investment income in there and the interest income into the system, as to see where that lines up based on budgets and estimates.
Okay. Are there any particular categories that may be of concern to you that could be a problem as we try to close out the year? Things that perhaps are either from a revenue standpoint are very low, and I understand that there are some instances that the actual collections have not begun. They can happen within a certain time throughout the schedule of the year, and so therefore there's nothing really to be alarmed about if you see from an excise, say automobile taxes, that amount is actually something that's been going on now. It's underway as that's being collected and the bills going out within the last month or so. So there's those types of things that I certainly understand, but there's nothing else from your perspective that you see that should cause any type of additional questions or concerns at this point.
Sorry, I was muted. At this point in time, no, without doing a deeper dive, as you stated, motor vehicle, typically the bigger commitments don't come out until March. So therefore you have lower revenue at this point in time. Similarly too, for payments in lieu of taxes, I believe some of the major components of those come in towards year end. So you wouldn't get to see necessarily a good one-to-one relationship in terms of the entire budget versus where we are in the fiscal year. It just doesn't work like that. So if you are 50% through the year, maybe the outsider may think, well, everything should be 50% collected right now. And unfortunately, it doesn't work out that way. If only it was nice and neat and simple.
Understood.
But certainly for some of the bigger ones, like licenses and permits, that can be also cylindrical too, depending upon when the work was done. Springtime, we should see a nice bounce in those figures, I would assume, given the ability to do work versus the wintertime. So everything else looks pretty good.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And then just my last question here, and I think this might be more towards Director Spellman. The investment income, I noted that the presentation provided a bullet point that it was for FY22 budgeted for the amount of 216,000 plus, and that has not yet been reported. Is there anything that you can tell us from an expectation standpoint when that kind of information will be provided?
I'm hoping as we go forward, we'll get, I didn't want to delay the information that you have any further by trying to go back and do the 6 months of the individual accounts and get that information together. I thought that it was more meaningful to get you this information, and we will work to get the interest income posted going forward. And I would hope when we get to the 9 months to be able to have the interest income included in there through the end of March.
Terrific. I appreciate that leveling that expectation for us. I do note that there is a hand raised by Council Flaherty.
Thank you. I had a question about the motor vehicle excise tax.
Okay.
Muted.
Julia,
You
you
muted,
somehow
Councilor
muted
Flaherty.
yourself.
I apologize. Let me try again. I have a question about the motor vehicle excise tax. And of course, the information that I have is for the 6 months ended 12/31/21. But what that shows me is that we collected 11.03% of what we budgeted for that revenue, which comes to, so 716,000, and we budgeted 6.4 million. And I guess that's just a little concerningly low. And I'm wondering if anybody has any commentary on that.
Through the chair,
Go ahead, please.
motor vehicle excise is issued on a calendar year basis. And we receive our first commitment from the Registry of Motor Vehicles toward the end of February. And we get the bills out at the end of February, and they're due in March. And that first commitment for calendar year 2022 was on track with the number of bills and the dollar amounts with the prior year. It was in the $5.5 million range. In addition, we receive our second and third commitments in the months of March and then in May. And we continue, we track those as they come in. So that this is common. And if you look at the prior year, you'll see we were at 14% collected for motor vehicle excise when you look at the 2021 column. So this is just one of the timing issues that the bills come from the registry to us and we get them out as soon as we can. But that first commitment is the largest, and it covers roughly 90% of our total excise bills that are issued, are out in the mail and are due.
Okay, so when will the numbers be available to be updated on that particular item?
Again, when we get the 9-month numbers, it would have a substantial amount of the first commitment. If you'd like, I could ask the collector just to get that dollar amount for you, tell you what was issued and what we've collected to date.
Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Will do.
Okay, that's all for me.
Thank you. We have a question from the town auditor, Sean McGoldrick.
Sure, and I just actually wanted to chime in there too, because I'm actually sitting in front of Munis right now. So posted to date through 3/31 is actually $4.1 million. So it jumped significantly. As Ed said, once these major commitments come out, February and March, the collections already are at 4.1 million through 3/31.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Is there another question from Council Flaherty?
I'm sorry, I'll lower my hand. Apologize.
Very good. Okay. So unless we have any other further questions, comments, before we close this item out, I'm going to give the opportunity to the Chief of Staff, Todd, if there's anything in addition you'd like to add before we move on.
I don't think so. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And other members of the committee? Good to go? I'll take that as a yes. Thank you. All right, moving on. So on the agenda to the second item. What we have here is the council president, long-term budget forecast, town auditor report, or take up any action relative thereto. That is Council Order 01622. Mr. McGoldrick, anything to report on that front?
No update, but I will just give a brief overview. So back last, September, October, the former Ways and Means basically wanted a 5-year projection, fully encompassing all revenues, all expenditures, just to help paint a better light in terms of what the future may look like. So we went through that process. We provided a draft report, I believe it was back in November. And subsequently, I finalized that beginning of February 4th. That was provided to the members of Ways and Means, prior and current, with that information. So if anyone has any questions on that, I will certainly be more than willing to answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that. And again, just to reemphasize, this is great information that you have provided us. It also gives us an added perspective, an added context from an expectation standpoint, and certainly focusing the steps that we would need to take collectively and then individually, certainly from a policy standpoint from the mayor's office as we go forward. We thank you for that. And I just want to, and we'll have an additional opportunity to talk to this issue, but this evening, I don't think that we will get into the specifics of this forecast for purposes of the other matters we have to address. But I did want to give members of the committee an opportunity to make any comment or have a quick question if they have. Seeing none, then we will move on from item 01622. And next up, I know this evening we have with us the DPW and the school departments as we discuss the capital plan. I'm going to ask the school department, in particular, the chief of staff and the superintendent of schools, Mr. Lee, if you would like to take up the SOI first.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I do have an ask to take something up first, but because we have the capital plan and the school department is here, and I would request that we take that item up when we take up the capital plan. We have a Community Preservation Act appropriation on the agenda this evening, item 22021, relating to the shoreline stabilization and flood control project. And we have conservation agent Kelly Phelan, as well as our CPC manager Liz Manning with us this evening. I would ask if it's agreeable to the committee that we take up this item out of order so that Ms. Phelan and Ms. Manning can, I suppose, choose to stay or go on with the rest of their evening as well.
Great, thank you. I'll ask if there's any issue with that from the council, from the committee members.
And my apologies to DPW and schools for not mentioning that to you earlier.
Okay, so we're good to go. So we will take up item, let's see, 22.
Page 11, Chairman Reynolds.
Thank you very much. Okay. Item 22021, Mayor, request for appropriation, CPA appropriation, Watson Park Shoreline Stabilization and Flood Control Project, or take up any action relative thereto. So I'll turn this over to the Chief of Staff to open up.
Thank you. It's so great to continue to come before this body to talk about these great projects and the use of Community Preservation Act funds. This is a project that the committee has seen before, and it relates to the shoreline stabilization and flood control measures at Watson Park. So this project was originally funded in 2021 in the amount of $300,000, and that is a portion of the total project cost. There is a portion that is grant funded through Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management. And so we come to this body in partnership with them. So the original allocation, unfortunately, was not enough to cover the bids that came in for the construction of the project. The first round of bids were received in December of 21, and I don't think, and Ms. Phelan can certainly attest to this, I don't think anybody could have anticipated the high cost associated with the bids at the time. So rather than award at a higher number, the project scope was clarified, some modifications were made, and the project was rebid in January. At the end of January, the bids received were still slightly higher, but certainly in a more attainable range as far as funding was concerned. So the current approved funding in total is just over, or just under, I suppose, $905,000. Unfortunately, the low bid came in at $958,000. So there are also some additional, what I'll call administrative costs relating to consulting and advertising. So the total shortfall in the funding is $58,726. The grant funder has agreed to increase the award by just over $29,000, leaving kind of the match, our half of the increase, $29,363, to be funded through an additional appropriation of Community Preservation Act funds. The request was approved unanimously, if I'm not mistaken, at the March 14th meeting of the committee. And so we are now seeking review and hopeful approval from this body, as well as the full council, for additional funding from the CPA Open Space and Recreation Fund. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Manning and Ms. Phelan if they have anything else to add. Otherwise, we will certainly take any questions from the committee.
Thank you very much. Ms. Manning?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just to echo what the Chief of Staff shared, it's a terrific project. It was a unanimous vote from the committee. I've been there in the past with my kids to enjoy the splash pad, but I haven't been down there since construction started. So I'm interested to get down there, but I understand it's moving along beautifully. So thank you for the opportunity to bring this back to your committee.
Thank you. Is there any other additional comments on the project specifics from the administration or from the Conservation Department prior to questions from the council?
No, I think Nicole gave the full summary of how it played out with bidding and how we got to where we are tonight.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Ms. Phelan. I'm going to recognize Councilor Flaherty. She has a question.
Thank you. So I want this project to go through. I'm certainly going to support this, but in order to make sure that I understand, it sounds like we put out the bids came in and they were very high and we changed the scope of the project. Is that what I'm understanding? And if that's right, then can you please explain the way in which the scope was changed?
Well, we didn't change the scope of the project. We just clarified some of the details that perhaps had been misunderstood. Some of the details about rebuilding. There's a head wall, which some existing drainage pipes come through. So we clarified the intent of how that should be rebuilt, because I think in the first round of bidding, some of the bidders did not fully understand that and kind of overestimated for that. So it was minor kind of clarification items like that. But the scope has stayed the same.
So the nature of the project is still the same, and it's just that we need to allocate a little bit more money because the bids were higher than we anticipated.
Exactly. Yep.
Thank you. I'm happy to support this project. That's all from me.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize the council for that district where this project is located, Councilor Maglio.
I too am very excited about supporting this project. I just want to clarify and use this opportunity on the record to say or to ask, there is no paving that is part of this project. There are no parking lots that are part of this project. Am I correct?
Correct.
So that there will be no rebuilding of or relocating or reusing of the current footprint in any way other than the edge around where the work was originally intended to be.
Yeah, the existing stone dust path, which has sort of deteriorated over the years, is being rebuilt on an elevated berm. So that's the only kind of hardscape part of this project. There may be other projects through other departments coming in the future, but there's no pavement associated with this project.
Great. So it would be those other projects coming from other departments that would be of particular concern to me in the future. But as long as those aren't part of this, I'm satisfied. And that was my main question.
Are you all set then?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. I have a question. So interesting point, Ms. Phelan, that you had just stated that there are other projects from other departments that may be coming. Is that correct? Did I understand?
Yes, I believe the DPW and Recreation Division are working on some plans.
Okay. Are they specific to the shoreline stabilization and flood control process?
No.
Okay. So they'd be of a different nature than what this specific project is asking funding for.
Yes.
Okay. On this specific task of shoreline stabilization, I know that there is I don't know what the length of distance that runs along the Manaquit River from the Smiths Beach area down to the bridge or just about the vicinity of the Braintree Yacht Club, the back of the DPW administration building. Has that area also been assessed for any kind of impacts or opportunities for shoreline stabilization of flood control related projects. I asked that because that entire area is a low-lying basin. And I'm just curious, is this perhaps maybe a phase step, and there may there be follow-on projects or requirements that you might be aware of?
Well, there could be follow-on projects, but the way this started with the focus area was to fix the eroding shoreline. And from there, it also evolved into a berm to protect the park, the whole entire park. You know, looking upstream at the Quincy Ave building, we did not extend that far upsite just because the scope of our project was limited to Watson Park.
Understood. Right. Well, that's a good answer, and it's a clear answer, I should say. I'm just curious of looking over the horizon and trying to understand that because of the history of that area down there, and with an emphasis on stormwater, for example, operations, and the objectives of that department's existence and what it does from a proactive standpoint, that would be an area of at least a minimum of assessment. And perhaps this question might be a bit more appropriate to ask the DPW director or anybody who might be here from the stormwater that might be able to just, I'm not looking for a detailed answer, but just, is there anything on the radar at this particular point for that area? And I'll ask that through the chief of staff. I don't know if there's something from your perspective that you might be aware of, or do we direct these questions to the specific folks I mentioned?
So we have with us this evening Director Arsenault as well as Stormwater Manager Hillary Waite. I noticed that Hillary turned her video on, so I'm guessing that she has a good answer for us.
Okay, so I recognize, who would like to go first?
Well, I'll just mention something. I mean,
Director Arsenault, yes.
To Joe Reynolds, council. So I just wanted to mention that the elevations in that area are much higher than the park elevations, but obviously if the water level rose enough, it could be impacted, but it would take up substantial flooding, because I was present there during the time when that park was flooded, and the DPW, that particular building, was not affected. And so it's much a higher elevation, and I'm not sure of the flood elevations at that particular location, but I believe they're significantly higher than the park. So maybe Hillary has something to add further, but that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Hillary.
Thank you, Mr.
Welcome.
Chairman. Thank you, councilors and members of the committee. To answer the question that you asked about whether we had done any assessments kind of along this whole stretch of the Manatequit River, I'll say from Quincy Ave all the way out to Watson Park, we have done a townwide assessment of properties that might be suitable for stormwater infrastructure retrofitting. And those projects particularly are looking at, in addition to flood management in the upland neighborhoods, kind of reducing the point source impacts of stormwater outlet pipes that are all along Gordon Road and that area. So we know that there's potential for green infrastructure improvements at the 85 Quincy Ave property, as well as at Watson Park, as well as at Smith's Beach. And we're looking at those for future funding opportunities, and looking at, in the long term, using those projects to complement this great work that Kelly has spearheaded over at Watson Park.
That is, I'm very happy to hear that answer, that there is a kind of a framework from a longer term put in place, that there can be one project that benefits any kind of a follow-on project that might be identified to that area. And specific to a comment made by the DPW director, Mr. Arsenault, and this may be a question better suited though for Ms. Fallon. You cited the historical flooding that happened in that area 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago, somewhere in that time frame. And is this particular project addressing that particular cause, or is it contributing in some way toward a longer term solution?
It is intended to to deal with or to prevent flooding from storm surge. So that storm that was actually twice in 2018, in the winter of 2018, nor'easter storms pushed, kind of pushed all the water onto the park. So it's intended to prevent incidents or impacts like that for the next few decades. At some point, given the projections on sea level rise, we may not be able to keep up with it, but that is the intention of it for the next several decades to prevent what happened in 2018.
Thank you. That's a good, I'm happy to hear that answer, I should say. We do have some concerns, and I know that the council from that district, and I don't want to put words into her mouth, that is a big concern as we go down the road further, and the potential of some scenarios of the sea level rising and what it may cause in that area. So thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so do we have any additional questions or comments on this topic before we ask for a motion?
I have one more question.
Yes, Councilor Maglio.
So something that you said, I think it was Kelly Phelan who mentioned the berm and the way it's intended to protect the park. And something just sort of sparked for me when you said that. Are there requirements on CPA funds regarding public access to the areas where projects funded by them are located?
I want to make sure I understand the question. Are you saying, you're asking, is it a requirement of CPA funding for open space that it be public access?
Yes.
I don't think that's necessarily true, although Ms. Manning may have more comments on that, but certainly, obviously, Watson Park is fully open to the public.
Not all of it. There are residency requirements to use some parts of the park, specifically
right. Yes,
the splash pad. So I'm just wondering if that creates, because that's supporting a park that is not actually open to everyone, if there would be any impact, if that's violating any CPA kinds of funding requirements. But I guess not.
I actually haven't encountered that question, but I can definitely look into it and we'll certainly get back to you with an answer on it. I think it's definitely the intention to make resources as available to the public as possible, and with accessibility and what have you. So, but I'll look into that. I think that's an excellent question.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, unless we have any other questions, I don't see any hands raised. I will ask if there are any motions.
Motion that in accordance
Councilor
with
Flaherty.
Thank you. That in accordance with the provisions of Chapter 44B of the general laws and with the recommendation of the Community Preservation Committee, the appropriation of $29,363 from the CPA Open Space and Recreation Fund for the Shoreline Stabilization and Flood Control Project at Watson Park, located off Gordon Road, Assessor's Map 3001, Plot 1B, conditional on the funds expended under the direction of the Community Preservation Committee and the Director of Planning and Community Development, for
Thank you.
favorable recommendation to the full council.
Thank you very much. We have the motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Councilor Maglio. All in, will Clerk Semino, a roll call, please.
Counselor Reynolds,
Aye.
Counselor Flaherty,
Aye.
Counselor Mackin is not attending this evening. Counselor Maglio.
Yes.
That's 3 in favor, 0 opposed.
Very good. That's unanimous. Favorable recommendation to the full council. We thank you, Ms. Phelan. And where did she go? There she is, Miss Manning. It's tough picking up people in a big grid, but thank you very much. Very worthwhile project. I'm looking forward to hearing the progress on this. And again, I also want to thank Ms. Waite for her weighing in on this, and Mr. Arsenal. trying to give us a bigger picture and seeing how this all may fit together as we move down the road to address the other issues that we'll be facing. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay, moving on. Now, let's take up the Superintendent of Schools MSBA statement of an interest core project, Braintree High School, 22020. Chief of Staff Todd, if you would set the table for us, please.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As mentioned earlier, we have with us this evening Superintendent Lee and Ed Cronin from the school department, as well as school committee chairwoman Lisa Fisk-Heger. As folks might recall, every year the MSBA, the Massachusetts School Building Authority, opens up for applications or submission of statements of interest for various school-related improvement projects. The most recent round of projects to come before the council involved the accelerated repair program and certain roof replacements and other improvements to our properties. This request relates specifically to the high school and for, I would suggest, much needed renovation and repair at that property. This is an SOI that we have submitted in the past and unfortunately have not been selected for. But try and try again. Here we are this evening. The school department, I believe the school committee has already voted to put this SOI forward. And the next step before submission would be approval of this body. And with that, with your permission, I would turn it over to Superintendent Lee and his team for any additional comment or information.
Certainly. Thank you, Chief of Staff Todd. And this will start with you, Superintendent Lee.
Thank you, Chairman Reynolds, and thank you for your time this evening related to this SOI. The SOI in front of this body and hopefully in front of the town council on the 26th is really simply to authorize me as the superintendent of schools to submit the statement of interest. We have again pursued a core project, which is either a large renovation, expansion, or complete redo of the high school. As you all know, although it's one of our newer buildings, it's about 50 some odd years old at this point and showing its age in a variety of different ways. We've been sending in applications for an SOI since 2018 on the high school. It is our feeling that as the MSBA helps other communities renovate their schools, we become more competitive in their process. And we are hopeful that it would be our turn, if not now, in the near future, to get invited into the next step of the process with the MSBA so we can address the issues that exist at the high school. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. The SOI is due to the MSBA on April 29th, and I think we're in favorable position to get that work done.
Great. Thank you. We appreciate that, Superintendent Lee. I'm going to ask the committee members for their questions. And do I see a hand? No? No questions from Council Maglio, Council Flaherty? Council Flaherty.
Thank you. It's not really a question, just a comment that I think that the high school is in dire need of considerable help. I hope that we are able not just to submit an SOI, but to actually be granted one. So I certainly will give this my full support tonight. And I just want to let you all know that my fingers and toes are crossed that this will be the year. That's all.
Thank you, Council Flaherty. I would echo those comments. I'm strongly in favor of this SOI. I know that it's the first step in the process. As you had mentioned, Superintendent Lee, that an SOI basically opens up a door as an invitation for us to pursue more concrete plans or deliberate approach to what actually can we do? What are the options that are most prudent for us to follow? And obviously, a lot of impact, what would influence that would be our ability to pay and the method in which we pay. Our education and our educational resources and buildings and environment are something that pays dividends that I don't think you could really put a number on. And it is something that the town of Braintree has always put a priority on to provide the best education we can for the students in this community. So I am 100% for this. I will keep my eye out as we go down the road, and I too will be crossing my fingers and toes. So
Thank you, Chairman Reynolds.
thank you very much. So unless we have any other additional comments or questions from folks on the call, it doesn't look as if we do. So with that, I would ask for a motion.
For favorable recommendation to the full council, motion, Braintree Public Schools Statement of Interest, Braintree Town Council, April 26, 2022, upon the request of the Superintendent of Braintree Public Schools, James Lee, the Town of Braintree, through the Braintree Town Council, resolves, having convened in an open meeting on April 26th prior to the SOI submission closing date, the Town Council of Braintree, in accordance with its charter, bylaws, and ordinances, has voted to authorize the superintendent of the Braintree Public School Department to submit to the Massachusetts School Building Authority the Statement of Interest form dated March 10th, 2022 for Braintree High School, located at 128 Town Street, Braintree, Massachusetts, which describes and explains the following deficiencies and the priority categories for which the application may be submitted to the Massachusetts School Building Authority in the future. Priority number 5, replacement, renovation, or modernization of school facility systems such as roofs, windows, boilers, heating and ventilation systems to increase energy conservation and decrease energy-related costs in a school facility. Priority number 7, replacement of or addition to obsolete buildings in order to provide for a full range of programs consistent with state and approved local requirements, and hereby further specifically acknowledges that by submitting this statement of interest form, the Massachusetts School Building Authority is in no way guarantees the acceptance or the approval of the application, the awarding of a grant or any other funding commitment from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, or commits the Town of Braintree or the Braintree School Department to filing an application for funding with the Massachusetts School Building Authority.
We have
So
that
moved.
motion. I'm sorry, did I interrupt?
Second,
Okay, thank you. Clerk Semino, if you conduct a roll call, please.
Counselor Reynolds,
Aye.
Counselor Flaherty,
Aye.
Counselor Mackin is absent this evening. Counselor Maglia,
aye.
that's 3 in favor, 0 opposed.
Thank you very much. That's unanimous approval for favorable recommendation to the full council. Thank you. Next on our, I'm sorry, what was that?
It's simply a thank you.
Yes, yes, certainly. Thank you. You're welcome. And thank you for the good work you all do and keeping your eye on that ball. We may as well stay on the schools. And so now we're going to move ourselves over to the capital plan requests. And let me get the right capital plan. So I'm just gonna, let's see, general fund capital request. Clerk Semino, I know that we have a high level request for the capital plan to take up any action. What we have this evening is for the 2 categories of DPW and schools, which is our general fund. The capital budget would be this is a general fund category for our capital plan. That being said, I would think that the hearing we are going to open up here at this point would be 22007, Mayor, request for appropriation, fiscal year 2022, general fund capital budget, or take up any action relative thereto. That was a question for Clerk Semino to confirm.
Yes,
Thank you. Okay.
thank you.
Yes. All right. So we're going to ask the school department, since you're already answering our questions from the previous topic. We have a number of items. If you could, oh, actually, let me, my apologies. Chief of Staff, Tom, I'm going to ask you to present this in the order that you would like it to be.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just note, we do also have with us, when we move on to DPW, we have representatives from water and sewer and stormwater. So before we move to those items, we would also need to open 22008 and 22009, just to make sure that we've covered all of the motions that have representatives and items for discussion this evening. As was mentioned, we'll start with the school department. Everybody received a copy of the fiscal year 2022 proposed capital plan. And just by way of a little bit of background for folks that have not gone through this process with us before, department heads are asked to identify capital improvements or capital projects associated with their respective operations. And we do that effectively 5 years at a time. So each year, the department heads kind of reevaluate and reprioritize their needs and project out not just the current fiscal year, but also the next 4 fiscal years to really provide kind of a larger picture or overview of what the department's needs are and where they anticipate needing to go as we move year after year. As was the case with the fiscal 21 capital plan, this is very much about needs and leaves very little room for wants. And that is especially true in the items that are funded out of the general fund through borrowing, which is 22007. With some of the other items, including water and sewer and stormwater specifically, as well as golf, those come out of the enterprise funds, and certainly for water and sewer and stormwater and getting there for golf, those funds are very well budgeted and are more than capable of supporting these requests and continuing to support the operations without any kind of negative impact on the operations. For the general fund items that are all being sought through borrowing, that is done to avail ourselves of current rates, but also to avoid the use of free cash to the extent possible as we continue to prioritize rebuilding those reserves. I also just would take the opportunity, there were some questions about the use of ARPA money for this purpose. As everybody knows, there are 2 categories of ARPA money. Well, categories is probably not the right word. There are 2 buckets of ARPA money being allocated to the town. The first is coming to us directly from the state to the town, which was used half in the 22 budget and will be used half in the 23 budget. And then there's the allocation coming through the county, meaning we are not the direct recipient of those funds. And I note that because since the issuance of the final rule earlier this year, that has had an impact on how we can spend those monies. I will say, as I mentioned earlier, those enterprise funds are well budgeted. They are equipped to cover these expenditures without the need for any of that supplemental funding or additional sources for the money. And for the bonding article, an assessment through Director Spellman and his team has been done that concluded that we are able to financially support that borrowing as well. What that does is it allows us to utilize the ARPA funds to support the operating budget, which is something you'll hear more about when you have the budget on the agenda. But I did want to just provide that generally to hopefully answer that question as we move through some of these items. I'd also note if anybody has dug into the final rule, it is a over 400-page document. Myself too, a few pages at a time every night. That includes something like 86 subcategories of eligible uses. They are very specific. They require very specific programmatic data and documentation. And so it's not as simple as identifying a capital project and designating it as being funded through ARPA. I also just would note that initially when the guidance came out, capital projects were specifically excluded from use in that funding. And so the town has elected not to utilize any of those resources for this purpose, and instead will be utilizing them to support the operating budget, which as we've talked about, you'll have before you in a matter of a couple of weeks. So all of that being said, moving to the school department, there are 6 categories of services or work that are being sought in the capital plan. Those relate first to the ESCO project. Then there is the town-wide municipal enterprise resource planning platform, flooring repairs and replacements district-wide, plumbing and HVAC repairs and upgrades district-wide, funding to support classroom library books for grades K through 5, and building repairs specific to Braintree High School. And so with that, if we're going to just focus on schools, Superintendent Lee, if there's anything you or Mr. Cronin want to add, or if we want to go straight to questions.
I just, some overview in terms of the request, Chief of Staff. Obviously the Munis operating system is a cost that we share with the town in terms of the implementation of that financial software. The escrow project, as many of you know, was work that had been done previously that has allowed new boilers in most of our buildings, LED lighting in most of our buildings, new china in most of our buildings. And it's the ongoing payment of that is in front of you this evening. With respect to some of the other items that are in front of you, high school renovations, as most of you know, we have a massive media center with largely unused space, working with an architect. We have plans to really make half that library renovated, so with comfortable furniture to give it to students as a place where they can comfortably sit and study and read and do the things we want to see them do in a media center. We also have a kitchen elevator at the high school that at this point is non-functioning, and we need to address that issue. Excuse me. And then there are other issues that I just on an annual basis come up that we need to instantly address and repair. So for the high school renovations, those are the top 3 items there. Floor abatements, as you all know, our buildings are old. The tile that was original to the building is asbestos laden, as is the mastic that holds much of that tile down. While those floors are intact, they pose no danger, but when they start to break up and crumble at all, we need to do repair work on them. We've done a lot of work at Flaherty and Liberty. This request would allow us to continue to work at Flaherty, abating the tile and the mastic while replacing large sections of flooring. We also know we have smaller issues at Ross, Highlands, and Hollis that we need to address. In terms of the plumbing issues, as you have probably read in local newspapers, we've had some plumbing issues at the high school, and work there in terms of replacing plumbing fixtures and so forth need to be done. But that same issue is prevalent across our district and in our schools. That along with HVAC, this money is a small amount of what we pay on an annual basis just to keep our buildings functioning and making sure that the kids have a safe environment in which to go into. The last item that the Chief of Staff mentioned was classroom libraries. Several years ago, we implemented a reading program called the workshop model. It runs best when kids have direct access to grade level and ability level books within their classroom. So this money will allow us to establish classroom libraries in all of our elementary schools so that we can fully implement that reading program. So again, those are broad highlights. Happy to answer any questions that may exist.
Thank you. That was very thorough. Well, I know that I'm going to turn questions over, but I just want to kind of level expectations here. We have some very specific items here to cover this evening. There are questions that were presented, and I know that there hasn't been time for your staff, Superintendent Lee, to be able to turn around the answers for those questions. And to me, my perspective, they're all questions that it's necessary that they be answered and some documentation be provided to us. You can understand with the amount of money that is being asked and the seriousness that we take on the Ways and Means Committee for our oversight, but also as individuals and as individual counselors, as we've all stated previously, of our unwavering support for the schools and the role it plays in the value of our community, or the value that is derived out of our community. So I would level the expectation that we will not be voting up or down on this evening, that we are going to need more information on this. And I guess could be a blanket statement for the purposes of Chief of Staff Taub also. From a DPW perspective, when we talk about those items as well, the committee members will have an opportunity to ask some initial questions, express some commentary. However, from my perspective, I would require to see responses to these questions, specifically project plans, scope of work, information that we would need to have a better understanding of exactly how these fit into the overall priorities of the buildings and the needs of the school from a capital perspective. And I know this capital plan is just that. It lays out the priorities over a 5-year perspective, but there are quite a few number of issues from a physical plant perspective. I understand that is a very significant challenge for all of us. So it behooves us even further to be able to get a clearer, drilled down understanding of just exactly what we're doing with this money and what it's being replaced. So I just wanted to lay that expectation and give you an opportunity to answer that, Chief of Staff Todd.
Certainly. So just to clarify, we did receive this afternoon, perhaps around 2 o'clock, a series of questions relating to some of the department projects that are proposed this evening. This goes back to the point I made earlier. In order for the departments to come prepared and to answer those questions, we would just continue to ask that questions or requests for additional documentation be provided with time to provide those responses so that we can make the most efficient use. To make the most efficient use, not only of the department heads' times, but of the committee's time. And so the capital plan was provided. I anticipated questions, frankly, and the only questions I received in advance were those from President Barrica. I received a question earlier today from Councilor Maglio that I hope that we answered. So I'll just stress again, we have 3 other departments coming before this committee on Tuesday evening, police, fire, municipal licenses and inspections. I have a question for fire. I have a question for municipal licenses and inspections. I do not have any questions for the police department. So in order to make the best use, we have a lot of department heads here this evening. In order to make the best use of everybody's time, again, committee included, I would ask that any questions with regards to Tuesday evening's departments be provided as soon as possible so that we can come prepared and not just come prepared, so that we can answer them in advance and give the committee an opportunity to review those before we all come together that evening so that we can continue to move these requests forward. I did share as soon as I received them, the questions received today with the departments, I did ask that they do their best to come prepared to answer them this evening. And I have no doubt are informed and educated on their projects that they'll be able to do that. And then we'll continue to follow up with documentation that is available as requested.
Very good. And I would agree with everything you said. Both sides of the aisle here, if we're able to get information ahead of time as requested, we certainly come better prepared to the table for a more fruitful conversation.
Certainly. Again, for folks who are watching at home, I think that these materials were provided about a month ago. I don't want to, I just want it to be very clear.
I am not going to get into a situation of he said, she said in the tit for tat, Chief of Staff Taub. It works both ways. So yeah. I would ask that you recognize that as well.
I certainly, Mr. Chairman, I recognize the delay in providing information this committee asked for, but I think it's only appropriate that these materials were provided in mid-March, March 16th, if I'm not mistaken. And it is a little disappointing that questions were only provided hours before this meeting so that we have members of the department, a significant number of them, here tonight that can certainly answer questions, but did not have an opportunity to respond in writing in advance, which has become our practice.
All right, then I'm going to ask you this question, Chief of Staff. When you reviewed this information, did you ask these questions and do you ask for this information? Because I know from my experiences, when I had to go to a budget, to a board, to of trustees to ask for money, to senior vice presidents and directors for money, if I showed up with a list like this and said, this is what I want, you know what my chances of getting that money? Nil. Because you need to tell a story. You need to tell us what is going on and where the value is being derived. And that's what I'm going to say to you in response. So I guess we both have a lesson here to learn this evening. That information needs to be shared. If we're going to get to a place where we're going to agree on information, then provide us the information initially.
With all due respect, Chairman Reynolds, the information that was provided is consistent with information that is provided year after year, which I think that you are well familiar with.
I am
So
very
if
well
addition-
familiar
if
with it.
additional information is required, it is not unusual for the committee to inquire of the department or of the town what specific information is requested. The departments have all provided documentation in support of their requests. That information will be provided. However, due to the short notice within which the questions were received and the start time of this meeting, that was impossible to do.
And
So the
I
information-
recognize that this is
Respectfully,
going to be a process.
Mr. Chairman, the town has no problem answering questions and providing information. But what we are asking for is a reasonable period of time within which to do that. The departments are here prepared to discuss their requests and the details of their project. The additional documentation that was requested today will be provided in follow-up. My point is to make the best use of these departments' time, is that those requests be provided so that we can respond in advance rather than have this dialogue. I have indicated I appreciate this committee's responsibility and the seriousness within which they look at these requests. I'm not suggesting that you allow or approve based on the documentation. I am asking that if this committee has additional questions, because I am a lot of things, a mind reader I am not, that they be provided so that we can give the documentation and responses in advance, again, to make the best use of everybody, this committee's time included.
Very good. I appreciate your commentary, your point of view. Our experiences on this side of the table have been not very good at getting information from you. So to chastise me for not providing you information in a timely manner for this evening, where I just set the expectation, I wasn't looking for all these answers because of that time. I acknowledge that. And as far as information from a traditional way that this is done, I know that my time sitting in your seat and others before me presented information more than what we have here to the Ways and Means Committee. Now, perhaps those Ways and Means Committees weren't as diligent. I can't judge that, but this is an expectation of this particular committee constructed in April of 2022. So we will move forward with this hearing. We will get to the information we all need, and we will provide our recommendations based on the information we receive. And I thank you for sharing your opinion. And now let's get the questions asked. Very good. So with that said, I'd like to start on the school projects. There were a number of questions that I had submitted, but I'm going to ask my fellow committee members if they have anything in general that they would like to address initially.
I
I see
do.
a hand up from Council Flaherty.
And actually, Councilor Maglio.
Very good.
I'm actually going to jump in if that's okay. So I do have some general questions. So when I tend to think I'm the person that made a mistake in general. When I'm looking at something and I see that something's not there, I think that I'm the one that's just not seeing it. So I look a little deeper, I go back, I check the files. So my question today was because I had expected something to be part of this that wasn't, and I was able to ask my colleagues for their feedback, and they said, no, that's not there. And so my email to you today was based on the 5-year projections, which talks about the policy for the capital plan is to provide a framework for measuring the fiscal impact of government services against established benchmarks and indicators. So when I hear 5-year plan, and those are the instructions that were sent out, I anticipated more than then spreadsheet columns with numbers without any detail here, just the numbers, which I understand that's just the numbers. And then there was a very brief narrative that said, well, here's what we want to spend on this. And it went, very brief blurbs by department. And so when I asked for the full plan, and you referred me back to pages G1 through G4, which are these pages, I guess I'm wondering, do I have the right G1 through G4? Is there something that I'm not seeing? Where would the indicators and the milestones and what happens if we get the truck, or we don't get this, or we build that capacity, like where are some of these implications? Where do we find that? And I guess I would ask the chief of staff that question.
I believe Director Spellman has his hands up to answer that question.
Okay, great, sorry.
Excuse me. After page 16, you'll see the summary of the department's 5-year capital requests, the current year and the 4 succeeding years. It's broken out by the general fund, the water sewer fund, the golf fund, and then the stormwater fund. We asked the departments to put together their 5-year plans of what their needs are. We try to address as many of the needs as we can in this capital plan. And then the needs that aren't met are pushed forward into the next fiscal year. And we ask the departments to update that. Again, as certain needs change and requirements and things dealing with specific equipment and other capital items.
So is that, those are these pages here. That lists each E1, E2, E3.
Correct. G1 that starts with the general fund.
No.
It starts with the town clerk's office, finance, planning and development, police,
Oh,
fire.
this, G1 through G4.
Correct.
Where is the information that goes with this, that describes, the purchasing a vehicle now means we can achieve this kind of goal this fiscal year versus not, we won't have enough vehicles for officers, or if we look at the schools, like not getting furniture for at all as part of the capital plan, like what is the implication? Is there a different plan? So it just, for me, it makes, I don't know where I get that story, that kind of information.
We received from each of the departments a detailed capital budget with the detailed level for the current year and then the future years. And if you'd like, we can provide that information to you.
Yes, please.
Okay, we can do that.
As long as it's more than just numbers.
It's more than just numbers. Yes, we will get that information.
There's like anticipated outcomes, goals, benchmarks, all that kind of information, right?
We asked for
mentioned in
specific information for each project, the purpose, the cost, the projected savings. We will get that information to you. Again, we've accumulated that over the last dozen years, trying to improve and fine tune the information that we provide to you. And this capital document is just a summary, but we will get you the detailed information.
Would that be something?
Excuse me?
I'm sorry for interrupting. Would that be something that I could sit down with you and go over? Would that save a lot of printing?
I have it electronically. I can email it to the
Perfect.
clerk and she could get that out to you and to the full council if that's, I'll defer to the chairman and his wishes, but we will get the information
That
to
would be
Clerk
fine.
Semino.
That would be fine.
Thank you.
Again, Chairman Reynolds, this is similar to the information we've received in the past when you were on the other end with me working and presenting this information to the the Ways and
worksheets.
Means Committee.
Right, exactly. They were the worksheets. They were the sit-down discussions with the give and the take and the justifications and what ifs.
The
all of those types
documentation,
of
yes,
things.
it's all, we would
Right.
be happy to get that information to the
Right,
committee.
it's a balancing act, and I understand that, and I can appreciate the difficulty that you're going through here, absolutely. But again, with a backdrop that's just somewhat unique this year, and with the fiscal situation we find ourselves in, I think it's more critically important, and I applaud those who ask those tougher questions at this particular point in time. How we spend our money is critically important, and the smartest, most efficient way is going to get us out of this hole quicker.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Councilor Magley, anything further on that point? Or
So,
would you like
and one
another?
of the reasons,
Yeah.
one of the things that I've been, nothing on that particular point, but one of the things that I've been juggling and trying to do my homework on is figuring out that kind of context for all of these different items. And so for me, I have a lot of questions. I'll step back right now and yield to Councillor Flaherty. But I don't know when the most appropriate time to ask all of them is. I will, but I'm going to yield to Councillor Flaherty right now.
And it just as before we yield to Council Flaherty, if I may, just as a suggestion, certainly you can articulate these in the form of a question in emails, et cetera, that we can get this dialogue, this exchange of information going, so that by the time we roll around for the 26th, and if there's a required meeting after the 26th, we will have all the information we need and that you'd be comfortable with the decisions you're making.
Okay, well, since you mentioned that, I do have to say that taking the time to ask the questions, to send the emails, to get a one-line response doesn't tell the story. So that's another reason why I thought this is sort of the back and forth. This is where the stories, the context, the information, the backstories, like this is where it should all happen, because this is where people are tuning in, this gets recorded, we have these conversations. I try not to do a lot of things in the background and to use this kind of time that we have now. Now, this may not be a good use of all of the town director's time, but it seems like there's a lot that needs to be reviewed and discussed and decided on, and not a lot of time. I'll close with that.
If I may, we generally, we don't post kind of questions and answers for kind of the more common motions, but for the budget we do, and we can certainly do that for the capital plan as well. So any questions that are received and responded to in writing, we can upload to the website so that when somebody looks for the capital plan, they can also see the questions and answers that were provided as part of the committee, meetings.
It sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to recognize Council Flaherty.
Thank you. I'm going to start with a question about the high school renovations, where we have $215,000 that are on request for FY 2022. And it sounds like what that money is going to go towards has to do with library renovations. And I'm wondering if Superintendent Lee would be willing to go into some greater depth so we can really understand what the $215,000 is going to achieve in the library this year.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. Not all of that money would go to the library. In fact, about half the money would go to the library. As I mentioned, we have an inoperable elevator that needs to be repaired. We also have some water heater issues that we need to deal with. But in terms of the library, because that specifically was your question, if I could orientate you to the front of the building as you face the library, that half of the media center, and again, the media center is massive, it has been used for storage of desks for an extended period of time. In that essence, it's wasted space during the school day unless there's testing going on. So this money would allow us to create about half that forward space as more of a lounge area with comfortable furniture for students, charging tables, things of that nature that you find in a public library where people can sit, spend time, read, do some homework, collaborate with one another. That is simply not an option in that space currently. So it is an ongoing effort to make the media center more useful to our students. If you went way back in time, all that area was filled with bookcases and novels and other types of documents. In our digital age, those bookcases are long gone. And so it's us trying to more appropriately utilize that space by making a more comfortable environment for students.
Okay, so it's been a long time since I've been in the high school library. And so right now it's being used for storage of desks, is that right?
Yes,
Where will
and
you
those
put the desks?
I apologize for interrupting. We store desks there because during MCAS and AP testing, we lay out that area with desks for testing for students. But then the desk gets stored right back up against that window. And one, it's unsightly from the outside. Two, it's not used appropriately by students. So this would be an attempt to create a better space for students to be able to do work within. And again, years ago, those were bookcases. That's long gone. The library, I don't know when the last time you were in the library, it is a gargantuan space. And we are obviously seeking to make the full use of it for our students' benefits, where we believe kind of the plan that we've worked with MDS, which is Miller Dyer Spears, same architects that have worked on the East and South projects, to come up with a coherent plan, to be able to utilize that space effectively. So we think that's in the best interest of students.
Okay, so $215,000 isn't very much, and we're spreading it across an elevator, a water heater, and library. Does that mean we're using this to buy some furniture for the library?
A lot of that is furniture, correct?
Okay, and can you tell me more about what we need to buy a new water heater for the school, for the high school?
So the water heaters within the high school are, there are two of them, and Ed can speak more articulately than I can. They are mammoth. One of them does not function at all. One is at reaching its end of life. So we need to come up with a cogent plan to address that issue in a way that makes sure that we don't lose hot water capability at the high school.
Okay, so we're going to buy two water heaters, or are we going to buy one much more efficient?
No, the demand for hot water at the high school is not the same as it was when the building opened in '72. They used to wash all the dishes there. I don't say this to be gross, but kids used to shower more frequently after physical education and such. So the demand does not require the same capacity that the original water heaters represents. So we would be looking for a smaller scale solution to that problem.
Okay, so you have a lower demand on the hot water heater, but you have some demand, so you can't stick with what we have. We have to have something new.
We need to be actively coming up with a solution, because that existing water heater that's still functioning is not long for this world.
I understand. I have the same problem in my own house. Okay, so and then the elevator, can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
It's a kitchen elevator. Our kitchen is beneath the cafeteria. They bring the food up through a service elevator. That elevator right now is non-functioning. We would have to bring in a repair company to do the work on that elevator. We would bid out the project because, ballpark figure, we're going to be close to 50, 60, even $70,000. But we need to get it up and running before the school year begins.
Okay, so what are you doing now to compensate for the absence of the kitchen elevator?
They're bringing it up physically. It's not a long-term solution.
Okay, how long has it been broken?
Mr. Cronin, do you have an answer for that question?
It went down probably about 4 months ago, when we deemed that it wasn't fit for there to be actual people on the elevator. So for the 4 months, we started just putting the food in, sending it up and going up and retrieving the food. That also became a problem. So we determined that it was best to repair the elevator completely. which is one of the dilemmas we certainly have with the high school and our other buildings. How much repair do you put into a building of that age? And we think that this is one of those things that affects everyday work life and the everyday life of the kids in the school. And we think it's important that we get it fixed as soon as possible.
I would agree. I'm just trying to get a full picture. So right now, people are carrying things up and down stairs every single day, and they have been doing so since December. And they're going to continue to do so through the end of this year until we can get a heater for the school for next year.
Unless we can get the elevator fixed during the course of this year. We've already gone out to bid. We've already received a price of, I believe it was 68,000 and change. And we will get that work started as soon as we can. We've hit an additional unforeseen problem that we do in many of our schools called asbestos. And so we're trying to see what that might do to the project.
Okay. So for budgetary reasons, if we have $68,000 plus a certain amount that we need to shell out in order to handle asbestos remediation, how do we handle that using this year's budget if we're not allocating this money until next year?
All bids that have gone out are subject to appropriation.
Okay. All right. The elevator is $68,000. I mean, I just don't see how we're going to get more than a couple of chairs for the library, considering we have the water heater and the elevator to contend with. Can you break it down a little bit better, Superintendent Lee?
We have a wonderful plan for the media center that was brought up by the and requested by the principal of the high school. We brought in the design team that designed the East Media Center and has designed the South Media Center. And we want something as nice for the high school students. They came up with a plan, the furniture, there will be furniture in there that will be very unique for the district, certainly, but not to high schools within the state that have been built within the last 5 years. There will be large screen TVs. There will be recharging stations. In fact, as we sit, the carpet is currently being replaced in that area of the library, because as you can imagine, we do not want 50-odd-year-old carpeting underneath this brand new furniture.
Ed, do you have the ballpark figure on it?
The ballpark figure on the entire project is about 120 to 125,000. But again, supply chain issues with the furniture, you know, that right now, our best guesses would arrive in August.
Okay, so 120,000 leaves 95. I mean, it cuts almost in half the amount that's being asked for. You think that you can get the elevator repair and the water heater and all of this for $215,000?
I think we confidently feel we can get the media center and the elevator repaired, and we can go a long way to working towards the water heaters, which we know we have to deal with. You know, a lot of what happens in the school is right on time disasters, and we have to address them. So when you look at, right, so when you see our capital request with the limited information you have, part of it is us knowing that something that we don't know about today is going to break tomorrow, and we need to be in a position to quickly move on it. So, you know, the planning that Ed Cronin and Chris Scully have gone through in terms of the media center is the preponderance of the money that we're asking for. The elevator we know needs to be repaired, and the money is still available for that. And the water heater is a solution we need to continue to work on, because you're right, that 250 won't cover all of it.
We also do have a request in for plumbing and HVAC, which can supplement the water heater if necessary. I try to combine those as best I can.
Okay, I have a further question about air conditioning, which is listed on your 5-year plan. I can see that that is expected to come into play in FY 2024. And I'm wondering if you can expand a little on what that plan is. I mean, most of the schools in the district, aside from Flaherty, don't have air conditioning. And I think parents would be interested to know what the plan is on that.
I think from my perspective, I don't want to say the summers are getting hotter, although they are, but more to the point, they're expanding into the spring and into the fall. We have a lot of rooms with a lot of classrooms without air conditioning that are facing directly into the sun during various times of day. And I believe going forward that that is going to be a need that we should start anticipating now.
So I certainly can agree. And what I'm trying to get at is, are you thinking about window units? Are you thinking about particular schools? Can you add some detail to this idea?
Some schools have more air conditioning now than others. Highlands, Liberty have large areas that are air conditioned. Morrison, there are many places I can think of in Ross and certainly Hollis that do not. And I think it sort of depends upon where other financing comes from. We get help replacing air conditioners, which we're doing right now at Flaherty from a grant given to us from the Plaza, who provided the original air conditioners in the buildings. Highlands has a PTO that wants to add some other buildings do not. So in terms of equity, it's where do things fall? Where can we find money elsewhere? And if we can't find money for certain buildings, can we supplement it with capital?
So you're saying that Hollis and Ross have the least air conditioning. I mean, my kids went to Liberty, and the idea that Liberty has more air conditioning than some schools is like, I think that's, I can't say that I agree.
Well, I recall when I came here in just prior to that awful winter of 2015, and we had to shovel off all of the roofs, Liberty lost more air conditioners that were in the windows than any other buildings. As they pushed the snow off the roof, came down the side of the buildings, caught the air conditioners and broke quite a few of them. So yes, not all the classrooms in the building are air conditioned, but an awful lot of them are. And again, they're coming to the end of useful life. And I think we need to consider the possibility of replacing them since we will not be replacing the entire elementary school itself.
They are certainly coming to the end of their useful life. And what I would hope is that there is some plan for equity to be applied to this that's not dependent on, one PTO being more active than somebody else's PTO. Air conditioning, in my opinion, is increasingly essential because, like you said, we're not trending away from weather. The hot air, the heat is encroaching in the fall on our students, and it's encroaching in the summer on our students. And I know from experience how very difficult it is to teach in a classroom where the kids are just overheated. You get very diminishing returns. And as a consequence, I think that air conditioning, it can't be a priority because our schools are in such a troubled condition, but it has a tremendous impact where you can put it. And so I'm not hearing a very fully fleshed out plan for air conditioning in our schools. And that's kind of okay because you're not slated to ask for the money for it until 2024. But I think that having an equitable plan for how to apply the air conditioning in the places where it's going to make the most difference would be a really smart idea to get started on now.
And I think that's a challenge we've been trying to address, and that is how do you maintain equity? To your point, Counselor, we have certain PTOs in some parts of town that do an amazing job raising money. We have some others that are not as active, and that can't be the guideline that we use to whether or not a particular room gets an air conditioner. However, also to your point, when you see our capital list, it does fall a little down the scope of things in terms of the other priorities that we have, knowing that that'd be a great thing for all our rooms to have for our students. However, the safety and some of the other pieces that you see here top it in terms of what we need to accomplish right now. So it is a plan that we can continue to need to flesh out. It is the financing of it that I think is most difficult. We also have some very old electrical systems in some of our buildings. But the equity part, I think, to your point, is the most crucial.
Okay. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on to the classroom library books, for which $235,000 was requested and $115,000 is being recommended. That's a little bit less than half. And so I need to know, is there a plan for how to disperse the money? Like, do teachers have particular classroom books that they have already identified as needed for replacement or to add to the collections already there? What can you tell me about that?
So again, this is related to the workshop model, which we've been implementing in all of our elementary schools. The plan, given the smaller request for funding this year, is to outfit 2 grades across the district with these classroom libraries. These classroom libraries are set up by vendors that kind of take into consideration all the different reading levels that would be in an age group, the interest level of students who would be within that age group, to give a comprehensive library set to each classroom in that particular grade that kids can use. The hope over the 2 years would be that we fully outfit grades 1 through 4 in all the elementary schools that are using the workshop model, half this coming year, half the following year. So to make it equitable, we do it by grade level, not by site. And to us, it's a 2-year rollout. And again, these are comprehensive library sets that are recommended by reading specialists.
Okay, so this year with the $115,000, you think you can do grades 1 and 2, and then hopefully next year you can get the money to accommodate 3 and 4?
That is our hope, that is our belief, and that is our plan.
Okay, I think it is worth noting that the 5-year plan that is available in the packet that I have just asks for library books this year, and that's okay. So now that's only half of that has been granted. And so for the purpose of this committee, what I would like for us to do is remember that the schools only got half the books that they asked for this year, so that next year when they ask again, we'll know why.
And I'll be happy to remind folks, because again, that was the plan that we came up with given the constraints that we were facing.
Okay, and then the next thing I wanted to ask about has to do with furniture, which is listed on your 5-year plan as a need, but it's not accompanied by any requests for supporting funding. Can you explain? I mean, it sounds like you think you need furniture, but you don't expect to get any furniture. I mean, why is it constructed like that?
The reason, if I may, Superintendent, the reason that it was put together that way is we have an awful lot of old furniture in the district. We also, when East went into play, we refilled an entire brand new building with brand new furniture. As South comes online, we'll be putting in brand new furniture into a brand new school. That leaves furniture for that we have bought for those buildings that is relatively new to go potentially to other schools. Now, it's generally larger furniture, so it's not appropriate for grades 1 and 2, but it might certainly be for 3 and 4. We also, as part of some of the professional development that has gone on with the teachers, have gone to a system where they don't want desks, they want tables. But as we found during the pandemic, tables didn't work. We had to have desks that were 3 feet apart. So then a mad scramble to find desks to fill in. I think that the furniture in a lot of the buildings at this point is at close to end of life, and I think we should be prepared to replace some of it as we go forward.
I think you should too, which is why it surprises me that there's nothing in your 5-year plan for furniture. Is that likely to change? next
It
year as
certainly
you
is, but at this
reassess?
point, I want to see what becomes available from South. And because I know we bought some new furniture for them in recent years, and where that can go, and what might happen as, you know, we potentially make changes to the district in the future and to where classrooms are and where age groups are.
Okay, well, that does make some sense to me. Thank you. So now I'm going to return to a question. Chief of Staff Cobb has addressed this to some extent, but I need further explanation. We have $106,000 basically that's requested for plumbing and HVAC. And I need a clearer understanding, or maybe just another reminder of why we can't apply for that to be covered through the county ARPA money.
I'm not sure what the county ARPA money actually provides. I've not seen those rules. I do know that with the ESCO project and putting in new high efficiency boilers in buildings, I had anticipated many breaks in steam pipes along the way. That is indeed occurring. We are replacing steam pipes constantly. The operating budget cannot absorb the amount of steam pipes we need to replace. We recently had a situation at Highlands where a toilet was flushing hot water. Tracing it back, we realized that hot water was not tied to the toilet in any way, shape, or form, but under a crawl space that is not often visited, we discovered a leak in a steam pipe that was heating up the cold water pipe that was going to that toilet. So obviously a replacement of the steam pipe was required. We have plumbing and HVAC people on site pretty much daily.
And if I may, through the chair, as it relates specifically to the ARPA money, there is an infrastructure category that is one of the 7 categories that then have about 86 subcategories. And the category that relates to infrastructure is very much focused on clean water, drinking water, and water and sewer, as well as broadband. And so it's not a kind of a plug and play. And I think that Sean McGoldrick can probably, I hope, agree with me that it's just because it's infrastructure based and in a school doesn't necessarily qualify it for use in one of the categories. And so we would look to borrow to fund that investment.
If I may.
Yes.
Certainly.
Great, thank you. So with ARPA, yes, there are 7 main categories. Julie, can you just mute yourself?
I'm sorry.
Thank you. There are 7 main categories, and out of those 7 categories, as Nicole mentioned, one is water, sewer, broadband, which kind of takes that off the table. So if there were any hope to find room within ARPA, it would probably be under supporting public health or economic impacts. Each one of those, I believe one has 14 subcategories, another one has 35. So it would take digging to try to find that. We also have to tie this into COVID-19. When you look at supporting public health and you look at negative economic impact, you have to relate it to COVID-19 and how this resolution would help arise from COVID-19 or help with COVID-19.
Councilor Flaherty?
Okay. So I think that kind of rounds it out for me. I will yield the floor to anybody else who has other questions.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on that comment. So as far as ARPA money goes, there is quite a bit of categories, and there is a very distinct connection that needs to be made. And all of that, I think, is what the expression of some of the folks on this call and in other platforms around the town. Pretty much that's the question. Is the work being done for us to look and see, are there opportunities that present themselves for us to be able to substitute non-eligible ARPA money for eligible ARPA money categories within our budgets? So that's a good exercise for all of us to try to kind of get our head around and understand that it's going to take a lot of work for us to do that diligence, that kind of connection of categories that from a very specific rule set that the county ARPA money that we are asked to operate within. Each municipality is asked to operate within. So, and I think those guidelines have been out there since January. So,
Sorry, I apologize, Mr. Chairman. I didn't mean to cut you off.
So my point being is that I do believe that there is an opportunity for us to at least find some monies that are out there that can be, and if there are numerous categories, and yes, there are a significant amount of subcategories within each pull down categories within each of those 7 major categories. So there is that opportunity, but I do have a couple of questions. Before I do, I'm going to give Chief of Staff Todd, you sounded like you had a comment.
Thank you. Just so that the committee knows, we have been doing that. We have been doing that since the guidance came out in late January. We've met with our representatives on the federal level. We have discussed it with the local delegation. We have also recently had a call directly with representatives from the Department of Treasury. And we have also met with the auditors who are involved, not just on on the town side, kind of advising on this issue, but also working directly with the county and reviewing with the county commissioners. So we are going line by line. We are working with the departments. As I mentioned earlier, we have identified the ability to fund these projects, and given the specific nature that's required in order to allocate or request ARPA money for these purposes, we are focusing our efforts on fiscal year 22 expenses that are eligible for reimbursement, as well as items in the fiscal 23 budget that are eligible kind of for that advanced funding that fall within the categories. Those are specifically in the area of behavioral and mental health, both on the town and on the school side, crime prevention initiatives that are tied to what has become a nationwide increase in criminal activity as a result of the pandemic, as well as the need to enhance some of our public spaces. Those are areas that have been identified as eligible expenditures and areas that we believe would benefit from some of this funding and utilize that as part of the operating budget to continue to support those operations and those departments. So that exercise is absolutely well underway, and I expect that you will see the benefits or results of that as we continue to present for year end of 22 and 23.
Thank you. That's very helpful update. I appreciate that. All right, so I'm going to get into the specific questions, and I just want to note that Council Flaherty, you did ask quite a few questions there, and a lot of them were very similar to my own questions. And again, just as a background here, we do have those other questions that we talked about that we can, the opportunity over the next week for the participants from each of the departments to be able to review and answer those questions and provide some clarity and some background. And so what that does to me is that it gets us to a justification. Those are great questions that have been asked, excellent answers that have been given. But I think what it provided for me is an example of putting everything into a context, putting into getting me to understand what exactly is going on. I guess maybe it's just the way that I think. So as a great example of that was the conversation that had to do with the high school water heater. Its allocation. It is a great example of, all right, what is the information that we need to order us to give us to a level of comfort or a level of justification, a level of confidence that we're spending the money the best way we can, that we've really looked at this from a number of different ways, and that we can proceed confidently with the recommended course of action that the administration has put before us tonight. And I think for that case, it would have to be, you'll see in my question, scope is it's the first step. It's a scope. A lot of project management experience and oversight, project ownership. Scope is the biggest killer of a project when you get scope creep. So us understanding as those who have to support this, who have to approve this, scope's very important, the approach and the analysis that was taken. I know that, what are the options? We heard that talked about. What are the alternatives that are available? These are kind of that story that tells us, and it doesn't need to be complicated. It doesn't need to be incredibly detailed, but it provides us with a situational awareness of what you are facing and that what are the challenges that you have. So when we understand what the approach and the analysis that's been undertaken, what are the alternatives that are available that you've reviewed, the decision, the impact statements of this, if we don't do something, and they don't have to be, as I say, long and extensive, and what's the concept of the implementation? That gives us a higher level of confidence that it takes something that's out, I'm going to say way out here, and it brings it into here from my level of understanding, and I can start to see more clearly and feel more confident. So I'd be happy to share that with you in just a brief summary and what the expectation of what we're looking for an answer. But I thought that was a great exchange between the counselor and the school representatives, the water heater allocation, and then how that broke down into elevators and how that broken down into chairs. For that one line item, let's see, high school renovations of $215,000. To understand what goes into that, that gives me a higher level of confidence that we're spending this money the best way that we can. So I'm going to leave that at that. I don't have
Could I just
anything.
add, Counselor
sorry?
Reynolds, Counselor Reynolds, I'm sorry, I'm on my headphones now. I had to
Yes.
move, but I would just like to echo and underscore the comment you just made. I found that absolutely interesting and a good exchange and an example of what you get when there's a back and forth and there's direct communication, as opposed to trying to figure out what questions to ask and not have an email that is, 30 cc's back and forth. But that's all I wanted to jump in and say. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So one question I do have that wasn't asked. Does the school still receive $1 million in capital as a line item in the annual operating budget, or had it in this past year? Chief of Staff Taub or Superintendent Lee?
So I would ask Director Spellman to remind us what the fiscal 21 capital allocation was. And I think for this year, Superintendent Lee, are we just under, but that was 880. So that was part of the discussion and collaboration where the school department determined that this would be sufficient for this year's capital plan. It is wholly separate from what's appropriated in the operating budget.
Great, thank you. It just gives me a better understanding then for the line item requests for the ESCO project and for Munis. So thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, I think my questions for the time being, I'm going to recommend that we continue this discussion in the meanwhile, that we do have the answers to the questions. I will this evening send out just a recap of what I guess that 5-point summary that we could ask for that would be able to give us, as cited in that example of the water heater, that might make this a very easy process as you address the questions that we have already provided to you. Kind of gives you a template and of what it is that will really fill us in a little bit more. So I'm going to ask at this point for us we're going to stop on the conversation of the schools unless there's something in addition before we move on to the DPW items. No? Okay, thank you. So I appreciate the time of all the school representatives here tonight. Superintendent Lee, thank you. I appreciate your time. Mr. Cronin, I appreciate your time. And if there's anybody else I missed, my apologies, but I appreciate your time as well this evening. So as I said, you'll be seeing an email coming from me this evening. I'll send it through the clerk to the chief of staff, who can disseminate that down or distribute that down. That would, I think, would make it easier for us to get answers prior to next week's meeting. All right. Hearing nothing, we're going to move on then to the DPW items. So Chief of Staff Todd, do you want to open this up?
Certainly, I think it probably makes sense just to recognize the representatives we have with us this evening. We have Director Jim Arsenault, Assistant Director and Town Engineer John Thompson, Assistant Director Ben Hulk, Facilities Director Mike McGurty. I'm just working, it's like Hollywood Squares over here. Director of Golf Operations Darren Brown. We have Chris Trudell from Engineering. This might be Chris's first appearance before the committee, so welcome to Chris. Water Superintendent Lou Dutton, Acting Director of Recreation Chris Griffin. We've already met from Stormwater Hillary Waite, from Solid Waste and Recycling Jeff Kuntz, and Finance Rob DeVito. I think that is everybody. Yes, I think I got everybody.
Great.
And we have requests before you this evening from a variety of different financial buckets, all of which falling under the Department of Public Works. And I think rather than, everybody has the plan and has received the summary of the projects. And so it might make sense for this to go straight to questions.
Okay. So I'm going to offer up to, I think we have Councilor Maglio. Unfortunately, I know she had another commitment this evening and she may be mobile right now en route, but she is on the phone with us and doesn't have the ability, from what I can tell, to raise her hand. So I'm going to ask her for any questions she might have first.
I will defer to Councilor Flaherty for right now. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you. I do have some questions. Most of them, well, I'll just go one at a time. I noticed that the Pearl at Ivory and John Marr Highway, there was a request for $650,000 and there was no recommendation for that. So I remember that there was a substantial portion of this. This was discussed at the town council meeting I don't know, maybe a month or two ago. And I think that a certain amount of money has been invested in it so far. And I need to know how much money has been invested in this so far and how long we can sort of push it off before we get diminishing returns on what we've invested thus far.
Through you,
Yes.
Chairman Reynolds. So if it's acceptable, so we have spent some money, but it's basically just in the design phase of it. So it isn't a significant portions. But we are getting close to, we're about 90% there as far as the plans for development. And John probably can talk more exacting to what percentages and how much money we expended. So I'll defer to John, if that's okay. John
Go
Thompson.
right ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Reynolds,
There you go.
and thank you, Director Arsenault. Yeah, we've expended approximately 100,000 to date on design for that intersection, probably just south of that. As Director Arsenault said, we are at about a 95% design for that project. We still have some environmental permitting to do before it's a shovel-ready project, so to speak. But we are almost there.
And if I may just add to that, on that particular project, we recently submitted, there's some federal earmark funding that's available, and that is one of the projects that we have submitted for funding through Congressman Lynch and Senator Warren's office for consideration.
Good, thank you.
Okay, so there is some hope that if we are fortunate, we can acquire some federal funding and be able to persevere or continue with that project, even though we don't have it in our own capital plan? Is that the aim?
That's correct.
Okay. There's also listed ADA right-of-way upgrades, and I just need some further clarification. $300,000 was requested, and none was recommended for this, but I need to know, as part of your plan, what does this entail, and why is it important, and what are the consequences of not funding it this year?
So that's under facilities.
It's listed under engineering.
Oh, yes. Okay, so through the chairman. So
Yes.
basically, it's for sidewalk improvements that mostly what we're trying to get at ADA, so the landings in the sidewalks and things like that. There's a lot of improvements that we would like to do in the future. Obviously, this is a tight year, so I don't think we can move forward with it. But yeah, what we're trying to do is also as part of the transition plan that's coming out, is to try to have some funds available so that we could start implementing those areas that are recommended within the ADA transition plan. And so these funds are trying to get to that level.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions on that. First of all, you're saying that the ADA right-of-way funding is for sidewalks, and I just need to know which ones.
It's not it's not particularly sidewalks, but it could be landings and stuff like that relative to sidewalks. But so the ones that are picked out, I don't believe that we have actually got a determination on the ADA transition plan hasn't been completed yet. So we don't know what the ranking is right now, is my understanding, unless you know something more, John. I'm not aware that that's been released yet, right?
No, that's still very much a work in progress. But I think that was ultimately the goal, is when that report is completed and that transition plan is completed, to have some sort of a way forward in terms of prioritization, in terms of where we should be looking to make ADA improvements, in areas around schools and areas around business districts, high pedestrian areas and things of that nature.
If I may, Councilor Flaherty, just a quick question on that comment, follow up for Mr. Thompson. So I believe it was in 2019 that there was a sidewalk analysis that was done, very extensive, through Mr. Arsenault. You might also want to remember that, where there was the individuals who had that equipment rolling around every sidewalk in town, measuring with lasers, all kinds of high tech measurement equipment. That information was accumulated for the purposes of, if my memory serves me correctly, for the purposes of just this particular task.
Yes.
So from a prioritization, an assessment was done. Obviously, categorization of needs were applied. And so now here we are. Is this the direct result of that, or there is something that I may have missed prior to that what was required for you to get to this current state? Mr. Thompson.
So if I may jump in while John
Yeah.
unmutes himself. So the street scan that was done was part of the overall transition plan drafting process. And for anybody that's interested, that document actually was attached to the request for proposals that was submitted to hire a consultant, which we have since hired to complete the plan. And so that information will get incorporated into the transition plan, which will include the overall list of priorities for enhancing accessibility townwide.
Okay, thank you. I'm not going to be really go after this question where it isn't an item that has been requested, but I think Councilor Flaherty's attention to it, where there are other items that have been asked, I believe, for funding. Let me see if I've got this correct. I believe I saw other ADA requests in here. No?
Under highway. I mean, where
Under highway,
DPW
thank
is
you.
concerned, it's under
Okay.
highway.
So thank you. I had that quick question. Thank you. I appreciate the answer on it. It gives me a better context of where we are with this process. Thank you, Chief of Staff Todd, also for the additional information on the ADA transition implementation process, where that stands. And I'll turn it back over to Council Flaherty.
Well, so I have further questions about that. I feel like residents ask me all the time about sidewalks, and there's a very strong feeling in Braintree that sidewalks need to be addressed in a meaningful way. And I also understand that the DPW relies on ADA prioritization to decide which sidewalks to do. So that, makes a certain amount of sense to me. The draft that's available online of the ADA transition plan is dated 2019. And so now I know that we've got a consultant and somebody is working on finalizing it. Is there a deadline for when that's going to be done, when residents will be able to look at the plan and say, okay, here's the prioritization of sidewalks, and my sidewalk is, wherever on that list?
I'd have to go and check the RFP for what the schedule was associated with the work. I know that the consultants have started gathering additional information from various stakeholders, and we'll incorporate that into the larger document. What I can do is I can check the schedule, but I can also send you the link if you're interested to the RFP, which will have kind of some more detail as to what work the consultant is doing and how existing information and new information is going to be incorporated into that final document.
Okay, and just so I understand, when was the RFP issued?
The RFP was issued earlier this year in conjunction with a grant that the town received in the amount of roughly $50,000 to help fund in its entirety completion of the plan.
Okay, so that's sidewalks. Another item.
Council Flaherty, if I may just hold one
certainly.
moment. I believe Councilor Maglio has a question on the same ADA topic that you have asked. If you would be
By all
okay.
means.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Reynolds. Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. So I do have a question. So just for clarification, this was the transition plan from the draft transition plan from 2019 that is now, there's a consultant that is doing a study on how to implement it. And then that will be, once that consultant comes up with the plan, that is what we will be looking to fund in some future time, at some future time?
So the consultant was engaged to complete the transition plan. There are a variety of components that go into that, and this agency is well-versed and experienced in putting that document together. One of the components of the plan will include an assessment of these facilities and these public access spaces and a prioritization of those items, including their current condition and the cost associated with making the repairs. That is certainly going to serve in large part as a guidance to how we determine what projects to fund using these monies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council Flaherty?
Okay, so I notice also that traffic signal maintenance and replacement, where there was a $100,000 request, that is also not recommended. And I need to know, in District 1, there is an intersection at King Hill Road and Pond and Granite where residents struggle. And I don't know what traffic signal maintenance and replacement would really address. And so my first question is, what would that address that we're not going to do? And also, does that mean that the study that was done on the King Hill Road, Pond and Granite intersection is not going to move forward?
Through the chairman?
Yes.
So we do have funding. I mean, we did an analysis of all the signals throughout town. So we're looking at all the signals and seeing how we can better utilize them. That particular intersection that you're talking about, we actually have been doing a study on it. And so we're analyzing and looking at that intersection to see what we can get to have that operate more effectively. And so that we are definitely looking at that intersection, but the funding for that will probably be significant because it would be a rechannelization of the roadway itself, because right now it's skewed, as you know, and it's kind of not functioning the way it should. And the signals are very dated there as well. So I'm thinking that the project to actually renovate that intersection will require a separate, once we get the design done and we know what we're going to do, then it would take a substantial investment, a capital improvement project to mitigate that.
Okay. So then traffic signal maintenance and replacement alone would never be able to cover the cost of addressing the issue for that particular intersection.
Yes, it's the cost of that particular intersection, with given the dated equipment and the lack that the roadway not being aligned with the intersecting roadway, I believe it would be substantial. It would be probably well over $1 million for that intersection.
Okay. So I'd like to move on to certain items that you are going to get funding for.
Thank you.
So
Not
that's
many.
good. You have targeted asbestos removal. You've asked for $185,000.
Excuse me, just one moment if I could, Counselor. So now we're going into the category of facilities, and I wanted to take the opportunity to ask a question on the engineering prior to us moving on to the next district. Sure. Excuse me, the next section.
Yep.
So what has been asked is the roads program. Very important, critical annual program for this community, as what has been stated earlier by some of the previous speakers. Lots of resident feedback, complaints, etc. My neighborhood, I think my street, Weston Ave, it's like going through a rally car course. But Hollingsworth Avenue, its sidewalks, etc. I'm really looking forward to the assessments. Now, I know that there's a $1.2 million that is being asked for to be bonded. That's roughly, I think, what's been being asked on a regular basis through the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And from a Chapter 90 perspective, it's a very, very helpful addition to that program from the state on an annual basis. My hope is that number will increase before the final budget, the state budget, is approved, due to the fact that there are there's a lot of money and surplus this year collected from the state's taxes. My one question I have for you here is the notation, and I just want to understand this from the fiscal 22 supplemental appropriate. I don't know if it says appropriation or approximation of 100 million, Braintree to receive approximately 500,000 additional.
Yeah.
Are you speaking about a state supplemental?
Through the chair.
I'm sorry, yes. The chair recognizes Director Spellman.
The state had come up with an additional $100 million for the Chapter 90 program. Previously, the town had been allocated about $1 million from a $200 million allocation. The state increased it by $100 million and brought Braintree's allocation up from $1 million to $1.5 million. So that's what's in this request, is the $1.5 million from the Chapter 90, the $200 million base, and then the state made an additional appropriation of $100 million.
Understood perfectly. Thank you for that very clear explanation. Now we'll move on to facilities. And Councilor Flaherty, please, you have the floor.
Certainly. So I was going to ask about asbestos removal. This is on the list all the time. And I just want to know where we're going to remove asbestos this year.
If I may, I could refer to Mike McGurty, who's intimately involved in it.
Through the chair.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Great question. We are going to continue working on the Council on Aging. What we were able to do with the monies that were appropriated last year was we did the boiler rooms at the Eldridge, the COA. We had to go up and do work in the Foster School because it became a serious issue of exposure. So we wanted to make sure we alleviated that problem. We did invest a good portion of the money allocated last year to the Doherty Gym, which we've probably got about 85% abated. We have some windows which we don't have to touch. They don't create a problem. At some point when we do upgrade the windows at the Doherty Gym, we'll use funds from the asbestos abatement fund to do that as well. What we're looking forward to doing next year, or with this money, is continue the work at the Council on Aging and the Eldridge School. There are large crawl spaces that we were not able to get into due to costs and what we were able to do with the funds that we had originally been granted last year. So the monies we requested is to continue moving forward to address these particular buildings, simply because every time you have an issue with your heating system and you have to get into those crawl spaces, and the schools have the same problem. Matter of fact, we adopted these buildings from the schools. So we have to go in there and we would have to abate areas before we could go in and do a repair work. So the grand scheme we were looking at would be to get in there with this money and maybe take on one of those buildings and completely abate those areas. Anything left over, we may be able to do a floor room or two over at the Council on Aging that has some of the old tile flooring in there as well. That's what we'd like to do.
Okay, so it sounds like you're primarily targeting the Eldridge School, and then whatever you have left over, you'll use to target the Council on Aging?
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay, so, nobody's using asbestos in new construction, but we used plenty of it in old construction, but this is always an item year over year. So at what, town-wide, where are we with asbestos abatement? Like you said, 85% abated in Doherty Gym. But
Correct.
if you expanded that town-wide, where are we? What ballpark number would you put on that?
That's a difficult question, simply because a lot of it has been encapsulated, and you don't realize that they didn't abate it when they should have, and they've put floors over floors. We're looking down the road at the old Thayer Library. Now, we know they have carpet over plywood, and if you pull up the carpet and plywood, you're going to find asbestos tile. So you can't just remove those items. You have to have all three of them abated at the same time. So it's a difficult percentage to give you as to where we stand. It's growing. We originally looked at a 5-year plan, and I think submitted a number of years back was a $500,000 plan that we thought would get us to where we hope to be, which is not 100%, but maybe 80% townwide. I don't necessarily know if that's going to be enough.
Okay.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Did we lose Councillor Maglio?
Yes, she may. I know she had to drop off.
So we've lost the quorum.
My goodness. Yes, she had. All right. So Clerk Semino, have you been in contact with Councillor Maglio?
I'll try and get hold of her, but without her, we do not have a quorum. We cannot continue.
That's true. Thank you. Thank you for that notation, Chief of Staff Todd. So we'll just put ourselves on mute here for a moment. We'll wait for an update on that, and we'll take the appropriate action from that point based on the answer we get.
Counselor Maglio lost her connection. She's trying to connect back on. Counselor Maglio, are you back on? Can you hear us?
I'm back, but I don't know how long this connection is going to hold.
Okay, so I'm just taking a look, just to give an assessment here where we stand this evening. We're ready to get into the facilities, and I think that's a very important topic for us to discuss. So I know we're in the topic of asbestos right now, and I know there was some questions about town parking lot renovations. So town building improvements is another a question that we wanted to take a look at. I know asbestos, town building improvements. That's what that's what I meant to say, pardon me. So if Councilor Flaherty, if you could just give us the rest of your questions on the asbestos, and we'll see if we can get through some quick questions concerning the building improvements. Again, these are scoped questions that we had asked about previously in emails. I know all of us have been on this phone call since 5 o'clock. It is now 7:40. I appreciate everybody's time and attention, and specifically those who have patiently waited to be asked their questions and to provide the information they have been asked to give in the event that you would be called upon. So my recommendation would be, let's ask a few more questions here while we still have the quorum and the connection to maintain that quorum. And then I can submit my questions above and beyond what I have already submitted through the Chief of Staff. So with that said, I'm going to hand it back over to you, Councilor Flaherty. You're on mute.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's hard to prioritize. I don't really know how much time we have. I was going to ask, and I guess I'll just ask it. I recognize that asbestos removal, there's a lot of uncertainty in that, but I think what I'm trying to get at is, should I expect to see this every year for a long time? Like should the council expect to see this every year for the next 10 years, the next 15 years, as we move through the life cycle of our older buildings? Or is it something that, you see an end to?
That's a difficult question because of the age of our buildings and what we inherited. We would like to see an end to it. We thought maybe the 5-year plan would work. It depends upon how much abatement we have to do. Unlike the schools, we can remove tile and still install over the existing mastics. Although if you go and replace those floors later on, you have to go through the abatement process again. So that's one of those areas where it's difficult to tell when it does end. I wish I had an answer for that. It's going to, obviously it will wane off, and it will be more of an issue of addressing it as we come across it. I think if we get the opportunity to update any office spaces, that's when we go in and we'll do the complete abatement at that time.
Okay. The next question I had is to do with town building improvements. There is no sum that is requested for that in the paperwork that I have, but what was recommended is $30,000. And so I guess I need to understand why there's no requested sum, and also what are we going to do with the $30,000 that has been recommended?
So if I can jump in on that before
Certainly.
Mr. McGurty jumps in. So that was one of the items. A revised memo was circulated earlier this month, increasing the recommended amount for town building improvements to $130,000. And what you may have seen in the past is each individual department submitted capital requests for their facility. Rather than kind of itemize it out that way, the decision was made this year, since the work is performed under the direction of the facilities department, was to take as many of those requests as we could and consolidate them into one category. And so Mike can certainly expand, but right now there are 3 major projects that are anticipated to be funded within that amount, hopefully with room to do more as the projects come up. The revision was to fund or to remediate a structural concern that was identified at the police department in the area of the garage, which is estimated to cost, based on reports we've received from the engineering evaluation, upwards of $100,000. And then there are some smaller projects. For example, the planning department has requested some update and remodel to their workspace. And we are looking to remodel or renovate some of the space in the treasurer collector's office to make for better use of that facility. And then the remaining balance, and Mike can speak more to this, would be to cover additional projects as they present throughout the year to improve or renovate some of the other town locations and offices.
Okay.
Is there more that can be added?
Well, for instance, one of the projects is the tax collector treasurer's office. Right now, their record storage has to be completely renovated. It's not inexpensive. There is a pretty good size cost to that work. What they have right now is it's a dangerous situation. Actually, they're using 8 and 10 foot step ladders for record storage. And it's something that really needs to be updated and brought up to date. It's antiquated and it's really unsafe. So that was an important project that came in after. As far as the police station goes, what we have there is we have a failure in one of the deck planks, as they call it, which is a section of flooring. And, you know, again, it's up to $100,000 just to do that repair work. And depending on how much we can actually do in-house with our own department staff, will determine the actual final cost of that project. We have no choice with this one. The design of the building is sort of like a Legos. And if you could just imagine one of those Lego blocks in the middle broken, you just can't take it out. You can't take the building apart to repair it. So it's a difficult fix, but it's one that we do believe we can get done. And as far as the planning department, they have some work. They haven't done much work down there. We've done a little bit of renovation work for them in the past. They've got new staff. They've got new equipment down there. We are going to rearrange it and do a slight redesign for them so it makes the workspace more accommodable to the people that are working there. And we hope that this could get approved so that we could update that. They've got 4 or 5 different colors of carpet down there that have just never been repaired properly. And some of it does cause a tripping hazard, and it's got duct tape, and it needs to be fixed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I apologize if I missed something, but it is really, really helpful to have these kinds of descriptions of the work that we're allocating money for. And
absolutely.
So I want to thank you very, very much for those details. I did know about the police station, but the other ones I did not know about. I also note that there's $80,000, which has been recommended for the town parking lot renovation. And this came as a surprise to me because I know that the high school parking lot is in dire circumstances. But I also, it has come to my attention that there's a plan to pave the high school parking lot this week while the kids are out at school. So perhaps that will be taken care of. Even so, it comes as a great surprise to me that this has been identified for improvement. So if you could explain to me why the town hall parking lot needs improvements and what we'll
Sure.
gain, by allocating money in that direction, that would be very helpful.
No, absolutely. I'm sure that you've all been around the town hall. If you come in on the side entrance, you can see that it is absolutely falling apart, and it has been for over 10 years. It's just been patched and it's been overlaid, and its time has come. The island that is there by the handicap entranceway, the curbing is all wrong. They have to do a redesign. I think John can speak more on the design of the parking area to clean it up. We've got safety issues. It's not safe passage to the residents when they're coming in and out.
Excuse me, just for a moment. I just want to double check. Have we lost Councilor Maglio again?
Councilor Maglio is in the process of trying to log back in.
Thank
She
you.
just let me know.
If I could just ask you to hold just for a moment. I appreciate your patience with this. Nothing yet. Okay. She is connecting to audio. So because of the difficulty we're having with maintaining this quorum and the connection telephonically, or wirelessly, I should say, I'm going to have to stop our question and answering at this particular point because we still need to be able to take a vote on tabling these items, the items we have not had the opportunity to get to yet, as well as to continue these conversations that we have had. So I'm going to ask Clerk of the Council, Semino, for a little bit of guidance on here on just exactly those steps.
Certainly. So let's go to page 12, please. And we're going to ask for a motion to table order 22006, order 22007, order 22008, and order 22009.
Okay, so I would like that actually in a motion from one of our members of the committee. And then I can explain a little bit further our next steps.
Certainly. Motion to table order 22006, order 22007, order 22008, order 22009 to the next Committee of Ways and Means meeting.
Very
Second.
good. Excellent. Thank you. We have a motion. We have a second. Clerk of the Council, Semino, please. Roll call.
Councilor Reynolds,
Aye.
Councilor Flaherty,
Aye.
and Councilor Maglio.
Aye.
Three in favor.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate the time that you have taken this evening. Obviously, we want to work with the council, with the mayor's office, and we appreciate all of the folks here on this call that's providing us some of this background. This conversation has been very helpful to me, and I'd like to say also for my fellow members of the committee. I would be looking forward to some additional information that is provided to those questions we had asked. I'm right now ready to send an email of the recommended summary points that we had previously spoken about. That would be very helpful for all of us to have that understanding, a much more higher grasp of the approach and the analysis of these individual projects. You know, that's, as one member said, what's the story behind this? The alternatives that are available, as we heard in the examples of the water heater at the schools, understanding what the impacts if we don't do this project, or what are the impacts if we choose another course of action. And then, of course, the concept of how the implementation of this project would work, or if it's just a piece of an equipment. These are all values that I know that each individual department, when they look at these requests and when they develop their capital plan, they fully understand what their department's mission is and its capability, either to get a job done that's already on the books, or to anticipate, in the case of, say, of stormwater, what we may be facing coming down the road. So your time is very valuable to me. I appreciate it. And I appreciate everybody's participation this evening. So that will be coming out, as I said, and not to further belabor things here, I'm now going to ask the clerk of the council, or actually I'm going to ask for a motion for us to recess or to continue this hearing. Pardon me?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Yes.
Thank you.
Council Flaherty, you're on
So
mute.
moved.
I have
Motion
a
to adjourn.
motion. We have a second.
Second.
Thank you very much. Roll call, please.
Council Reynolds,
Aye.
Council Flaherty,
Aye.
and Council Maglia.
Aye.
All in favor
Okay.
to adjourn.
Thank you. We have, all right. That should do it for this evening. And I will send out some additional guidance to those folks who were here on the call that participated this evening. Again, with respect to your time and whether or not we would require you to be here with us on Tuesday evening.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.